Good morning and welcome to today's UKAA webinar. Lovely sunny day outside where I am, but all the better to be stuck in front of a screen. But what we have got is a really interesting session today, looking at the value of good design in build to rent. And we've got a great panel with us. I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. I think you can probably see most of their names and most of them will be familiar to you. What we're going to do is really focus on what the impact of design is on build to rent and the impact of design changes that have happened over COVID and lockdown. As renters have become more discerning in their choices, there's evidence of a clear trend to renters wanting high quality and well-designed homes. AGC, our host for today, our guest for today, and Dataloft have commissioned an interesting report which we'll discuss in detail on why design matters in the build to rent industry. We're going to look at the challenges and trends within design, tenant expectations, and much, much more. I'll stop talking now and hand over to the panel in a minute. But first of all, just a reminder that today is being recorded and the recording will be available on our website shortly. Do please use the Q&A and the chat button. We'll take questions at appropriate times and at the end of the session. Please do get involved. The more interactive the session, the better. Now I'll ask our panel to introduce themselves in turn, and perhaps let's start off with Sophie Wilson from AGC. Sophie.
Hello, yes, my name is Sophie. I've been an interior designer with AGC Group of Companies for 5 years now, and we recently completed It Water Street for Verdis at the end of last year. So, yeah.
Okay, and familiar face, Rory Kramer from Home Views. Rory.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. I'm CEO and co-founder of Home Views. If you haven't heard of us in a nutshell, we're the TripAdvisor for new build developments, but we have significant coverage across the build to rent industry. We've just released our build to rent report, which I'll be sharing some insights from today.
And Alistair?
Good morning, I'm Alistair Mullins, Managing Director of Vertus. Vertus is the build-to-rent operator arm of the Canary Wharf Group. We now have 3 live build-to-rent buildings in Canary Wharf, totaling 1,137 apartments.
And Chris Harman from Parent.
Good morning, as Dave said, Chris Harman from Parent. We're a brand agency that specialises in the property sector, working with everyone from estate agents, interior designers, software companies, all ends of that sector, really.
Okay, and last but absolutely not least, Sandra Jones from Dataloft, who's on mute.
Only a year into it using Zoom and I'm still making that mistake. Sandra Jones from Dataloft. I'm Managing Director of Dataloft. We're a housing market economics consultancy. We worked with AGC on this report to research the relationship between design and rental values and yeah, it was design and rental values.
That's great. And design and rental value is absolutely a crucial part of this debate. We've got a series of really interesting questions to answer. But first, I think before that, Sophie, you're going to show us a short video, I believe.
Yeah.
So over to you.
Hi, and welcome to the UKAA and AGC Group of Companies webinar, The Value of Good Design in Build to Rent. I'm Charlotte Robertson, AGC's Build to Rent Associate, and I thought I'd quickly run through our recently released Dataloft report before handing over to Dave Butler at UKAA and the fabulous panel of speakers. Now, I won't run through the full report, but I will pick out some key features, but the full report is available to download at agofc.com. Okay, so I'll just share my screen so you guys can see the Dataloft report as well. Design matters. Great design commands a price premium in residential markets, enhances ROI, and can result in faster lettings and reduced void periods. So I'll kick this off with one of my favourite stats from Home Views and Knight Frank, which is that there is an anticipated £4 billion investment in build to rent in the UK in 2020 alone, which shows what a huge growing sector this really is. Now, I want to touch on price premium and how good design attracts a price premium. In 2020, Savills reported there was a 16% price premium for luxury branded residents. And Modern House reported home buyers were prepared to pay 12% more for beautifully designed homes. If I move to this 10.1% figure here, which shows a price premium on furnished homes, that increases to 29.6% when you reach rental values of £2,000 per week. We've also seen in this report the importance of design is twice as important to new build renters than to second-hand renters. But other things that factor into design are well-being, quality, and outside space, which I'm sure AGC's very own build-to-rent designer Sophie Wilson, who is on the panel today, will talk more about. But for now, I'll leave you a review left on Home Views from a tenant at Vertus's 8 Water Street that was designed and furnished by AGC. Every square inch was thoughtfully laid out. The finishes make it feel as if we are staying in a 5-star hotel. Thank you all for joining, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
That's a great introduction to a great way to kick us off. Perhaps if I could dig a little bit more into the research and come to you, Sandra, first of all. Can you actually tell me what the sense of an 11% price premium for design based on home views data, what actually does that mean? How do we measure it, and how can we be certain it's about design?
Muted, right. Yeah, I mean, we're one of the most common questions we're asked is, can you find a relationship between price or rental value and something, you know, whether that's placemaking, regeneration, presence of creatives, or in this case, quality of design. And it's a really difficult thing to do, because you're trying to isolate what element of price can be attributed to that factor, when, as we all know, there are many factors involved in setting price. But to arrive at this 11% figure, we worked with Home Views, and we were very lucky because we've got access to their whole data set, and they're actually building a data set that is starting to give us some sort of quantifiable evidence for, you know, can you isolate a design premium? So they specifically, I mean, Rory will tell us more, but they've specifically asked the question about, you know, what is the residents' view on the design of the building they're living in, and then Home Views go through a process to rate the buildings on design. So we were then able to take the top 15 buildings from on design quality, or that were most highly rated for design in the Home Views data set, and actually correlate that with rents achieved. So it was just enabled us to quantify something that is incredibly difficult to pin down. So even though everyone might think they know that we pay a premium for design, it's very difficult to quantify. So having that Home Views data made it possible to actually come up with that 11% price premium.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Perhaps I can then turn the question over to you, Rory, and perhaps ask it in a more general term. What sort of factor does design play in the ratings that operators get on Home Views? We've talked about price premium, but how else does it affect their perception of the place they're living in?
Thanks, Dave. There's a really strong correlation between an overall building rating and design. There's also a really strong correlation between the management score and the overall star rating. And I think in a way, design and management, particularly in build to rent, go hand in hand. And by that, I mean, for instance, facilities. If we look at how tenants' experiences have changed since Home Views has been going for just over 2 years now, we have 25,000 reviews across the UK, 1,200 new build residential developments. And our new build to rent report focuses on about 40% of the currently occupied build to rent buildings in the UK, 3,500 tenants within those buildings, and compares their experience to 3,500 tenants in new build, but with a private landlord. So comparing like for like in terms of product or new build, but it's the management experience and the build to rent experience that we can really hone in on. And if you take versus Alistair's other building, 10 George Street, it's top rated for design in London. And the elements that are constantly mentioned are the quality of the finishes, space, outside space, and the facilities. And when you look at, COVID was a tricky year for any operator, and particularly any building with facilities where residents couldn't get access to. And I think residents understood the issues that management was facing and understood why they couldn't use communal spaces. But when they could, they appreciated those facilities so much more. So co-working spaces, obviously with working from home, shot up in reference points. But it was also about making the most out of well-designed spaces. So whether it's roof terraces or just communal areas, it's all very well designing them and putting them in there. But if they're not curated and managed properly, they can actually backfire on you. So that was something that really came out through the tenant feedback, was that, you can have all the bells and whistles, but if you're not making the most of it and curating that space from day to day. In general, some other interesting points: tall buildings are very highly rated. We actually did a report with the NLA recently and found that most of our top rated buildings are over 20 stories. And tenants also very much recognise a building when it's purpose built for rental versus office to resi conversions. There were some great examples where office to resi has performed really well. Vantage Point by Central Living was one of them. But there are a lot of issues mentioned from tenants in that. And some common themes in terms of things that weren't so great was soundproofing. Interestingly, tenants' expectations, I think, moving into a new build is that, you're totally insulated from everything, but that was an issue. And heating and ventilation, particularly where there isn't maybe comfort cooling, etc. So yeah, there's some snapshots from our report in terms of tenants' experiences and expectations.
Okay, Alistair, I mean, you think your praise is being sung there for design. How on earth do you go about thinking about good design? What is it? What does it mean? And how do you distinguish between your three buildings you've got up and running now?
So I think the challenge we had early on was that we had three buildings all completing in quite short sort of time frame. So, and all of those in terms of building architecture made them individual. 8 Water Street's a low-level building at 13 stories. George Street's sort of mid-level at 35 stories, and then Newfoundland's on 58 stories. So Newfoundland is individual in terms of its height, in terms of its views, but also we internalised the balcony space there. So the apartments there are about 20% larger than what you might see across London, which is a great advantage. We've seen the first few viewings there, people really grabbing hold of that, seeing the extra storage space that provides, the extra space now provides for perhaps a desk in the living space or in your bedroom, or in a second bedroom. So that was huge. But I think what we had, the challenge was that our buildings were in 1,000 meters of each other, wood floors throughout, although carpets in Newfoundland bedrooms, kitchens, are much in terms of finished bathrooms, much. So a lot of our design focus and differential came from our furniture, and that's why we went for 3 different providers across each of the buildings. And brought in interior designers to make sure that we were trying to individualise those buildings as much as possible through the furniture design, the FF&E. And across each of the buildings, none of the apartments feel the same. So it was a big challenge for those furniture providers to ensure that they could provide a variety of stock and a variety of finishes, but still keep in line with our requirements in terms of the quality that we required as well. In terms of the offerings are actually, in terms of especially amenity, are not hugely different across the buildings. We've got lounges, we've got gym spaces, we've got terraces. So it was very much about trying to give each building a USP. Newfoundland has its own one in terms of its height, its views. Water Street we've made pet friendly, and George Street, we sort of see our sort of young party building. And I think that comes through in some of the reviews that we've had. But absolutely, I mean, for us, in terms of design, as I say, a lot of the interior was set, and it was very much about driving through our furniture to try and make these buildings and apartments feel different.
So Sophie, there's the challenge to you that Alistair laid down, to make the building feel different. How do you respond to it, and how do you work out what you should do for a particular building in a particular design brief?
Well, it was just about really imagining who we thought the future tenant would be, and like we said, making it different to the other buildings that are already there. We did really try to draw on the woodwork area and all of the new kind of exciting. You've got the waterfront pavilions right outside the building, and just really try and encapsulate that into the design and into the styling of the show apartments as well. We really just wanted people that were viewing them, whether it be virtually or in person, just to actually imagine that they could see themselves living in the space and pop into the shop next door. And
Chris, all this seems to me to tie into the sense of a brand, trying to create a brand for all these buildings, differentiation we've talked about. Is design, is furniture the brand? What is it that makes a brand in build to rent in your perspective, if there is such a thing?
Well, everything really. I mean, no one goes to Starbucks for their amazing coffee, right? You go there for a number of reasons. It might be the interior, the culture that it represents for you, or just because it's easy to find when you're meeting someone. But that's all part of the brand, and it's why they can charge more than they should for mediocre coffee. But the brand is everything you do, and it's not your name, your logo, or your interior in isolation. It's the sum of all those parts all together, and it's why people choose you over someone else.
And saying it's everything is great, Chris, but if I'm in Alistair's shoes or Sophie's shoes, how do I translate that into what are the key things I have to get right to deliver on the promise that I'm making?
Well, consistency is a big part of it. You need, to be consistent across the board. So if you're aiming for luxury, your toiletries should be luxury. You don't go to a luxury hotel and see the cheap stuff in the bathroom. You see the nice things, and the toilet roll's nice and everything. And it's how people answer the phone and the uniforms they wear, and all of those bits consistently right, from service, how people talk to you, through to the products, through to the furniture, through to the name on the outside and the wayfinding signage. Everything adds up to build your brand and build that reputation, that credibility, and the value for people.
And okay, that I think is really important, Chris. And Rory, if we come back to you to say, how can you detect that? Can you detect the sense of brand amongst the people who are leaving reviews on home views?
You can. I totally agree with Chris. I mean, we ask residents to rate out of 5: design, value, location, management, and I've forgotten one of them because I've had a mind blank. But the perception of value is really interesting, because if you look at 10 George Street, which is one of the highest value build to rent buildings we have on home views, but it's also one of the most highly praised from a value perception point of view. So, although people are paying more than in most other build to rent buildings because of the location, because of the experience, they feel that's justified. And that is through design. It's highly rated in design. It's also through the management and the service. So I totally buy into that. And I totally buy into Chris's point that it's not just about, the name and the branding and the look and the feel. It runs through the whole of the building. And we're often seeing a lot of our reviewers who are really happy saying, I will always look out for this brand if I ever move on. And that's the key. A lot of build to rent brands a lot of our partners have buildings in multiple cities around the UK. And with what's happened with COVID, people are more transient. They're able to work from more locations, and they will follow a brand, but that brand is represented by service and everything else that comes along with a build to rent building.
That's helpful. Sandra, can I turn it over to you then? And one of the issues, it seems to me, that we've talked about is knowing who your customers are. If you're going to create a brand, you've got to have a view of who the customers might be. Who actually lives in build to rent? Do we know who lives there? And do we know how accurately we can predict who's going to be our customers in our building?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I'd say is there isn't a type. There may be many types, there may be many personas, but there isn't one type that lives in build to rent. And we work with you, Dave, or the UKAA, with BPF and London First on a report, didn't we, who lives in build to rent, where we actually profiled so we took a selection of build to rent portfolios and actually got the investors to contribute their data to tell us, you know, what is the age, the employment, the income, and sort of affordability ratings, so we could understand more about who lives in build to rent. And we benchmarked that against our Dreamer data set, which is a 5 million record data set of who lives in the wider rental market. As you know well, but you know, the key finding was that the build to rent tenant or tenant base is a very accurate reflection, or sort of mirrors who lives in the wider rental market. And the wider rental market is sort of 20–25% of the whole population. So we're talking about an enormous cross section of the UK population, which is represented in build to rent and in the wider rental sector. Having said that, we're talking here today about highly designed build to rent offer, and in as much as the build to rent sector, like the wider rental sector, has to mirror that whole cross section of the population. And that does include, you know, the well-paid young professionals who perhaps are traditionally often, associated strongly with the build to rent sector, but up from there, and you know, there's an element living in build to rent and in the wider rental sector that is the international footloose citizen with very high expectations of service levels and amenity and design. But I think the key point is that we've got the whole cross section. Is it Charlotte in her film at the beginning referenced the analysis that we did on rental premium, and we saw very much on that there's a step change. So when we look at we segmented that data by rental value, and you pick up a rental premium in all those segments that we looked at, but the rental premium gets bigger with the higher value rental. So I think that back to that design premium question, you know, that shows up more strongly in a particular segment of the renter population, or the renter demographic, which is those who are paying the higher rents and perhaps having the higher incomes. But it's visible across the spectrum. Does that answer the question?
I'm sure it does.
I think the key point is all kinds of people living in the build to rent, all kinds of people live in the rental market, and there is no one type.
No, I think that's certainly true. Chris, if that is true, how do we structure a brand so it appeals to a particular demographic, or how do we link the brand to the building? You said we've got to be consistent, we've got everything right, but how does that positioning work? And then particularly, I guess, how does that work for things like furniture?
We need to know who your audience is and who you're marketing at first. And everything you do in terms of brand and furniture can change how people see you, and it helps them judge if you're a good fit for them and their values. So it can take a development from just a good development to a luxury development, or premium, or eco and really sustainable driven. So I mean, that's, you know, in terms of alignment and everything you do. So again, going back to all these things, it could just be, you know, down to minute details like the books and magazines in the foyer and things like that. It builds your credibility, your trust and value, meaning, you know, a meaning to your value from every angle and every touch point. And you can change that with, you know, the smallest tweaks to, it's how people align themselves with you. It's why people buy into, you know, car brands that they've maybe never driven, because they see that it fits them and their lifestyle.
Okay. You touched on the term sustainability there, and that's one that seems to be increasingly important in the sector generally. And Sophie, if I can turn to you, do you see a demand for sustainability or an interest in sustainability in terms of the products you're creating now that maybe you didn't see a couple of years ago?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely been in the background for a number of years, but definitely in the last year, we've seen this acceleration in, you know, people wanting to know, you know, socially and environmentally more about their furniture, more about what they're using personally. So we're just, as a company, really trying to work towards that, and better ourselves as well. We're working towards being carbon neutral, and we try and ensure that we're using just the best quality furniture as well, as that's something that really does go hand in hand with sustainability. If you're putting money into good quality furniture, it's going to last longer, you're going to have happier tenants, and you're going to get a better return on your investment.
Okay, can I turn that more broadly to Rory and say, what from your view is the actual residents' perception of sustainability or interest in sustainability? Because for me, to get the industry to really deliver what it should do in terms of whether it's net zero carbon or whatever, we've certainly got the investor push, ESG requirements for investors. I'm not sure whether we've yet seen demand from residents or customers that will pull people in the same way.
It's a really good question. We actually only about 6% of our reviews in 2020 mentioned sustainability in any way, shape or form, which we were really disappointed by as a team. Like, we kind of hoped this would be more in the forefront, but when we kind of analysed why that was, it's really because to date, no buildings, very rarely do buildings put their eco and sustainability ratings at the forefront of how they market themselves or integrate it within their brand. It just hasn't been a common theme yet. It's usually focused around the interior design, the aesthetic, the service levels, the facilities. So I think that's a challenge, although you've got what I would call it the upstream elements of the property industry focusing on sustainability, and it isn't easy. We all know delivering a fully sustainable building is a task, but I don't think that's fed through into the marketing communication directly and how buildings differentiate themselves. I totally agree with Sophie. I think this is something that is coming. We've actually just started asking from March every reviewer on Home Views the same sustainability question, which is sustainability important to you? And if so, what of these 10 features are most important to you? And so watch this space. We'll have a report on that coming out in the middle of the summer. And the initial results, we also have started asking ages so we can see by demographic how that changes. But yeah, so to answer your question, it hasn't been a huge part of people's feedback to date, but my take on that is because it hasn't really been a major way that developers and operators are communicating themselves. But I think it's going to come into focus massively in the next couple of years.
And does that chime with your thoughts, Chris? That genuinely is going to be a source of differentiation or source of thing that people will choose?
Definitely, it's going to become more and more important. I mean, we're seeing it with clients, even picking paper stocks and being more sustainable. We've just done a print job on 100% cotton, so not a single tree gone. I mean, cotton's got its own water issues, but so it's definitely coming forward in people's minds. And I think more so with the younger, wealthier generation coming through, they value those things a lot more. So they'll be considering them, ahead of some of the other facilities. They'll be thinking about what is the impact on the planet of this place and, the greater world around me rather than just my own unit. So it's definitely going to grow.
And Sandra, do you see any evidence in the wider rental market of an interest or a premium for more sustainable buildings?
So I think your choice of words there was well made, because it's the difference between interest and premium. So definitely interest, but asking people to pay a premium is something different. I think Chris just made the point that maybe at the higher value ends of the market, where people have more choices, more discretion, making more discretionary decisions, then you can start to see decisions being, having that element in them. But where you're in the part of the market where it's about need, then having the extra bedroom or the work from home space or the garden or the outdoor balcony, it is higher up the hierarchy of needs for most people. But having said that, we've done a lot of survey work on this recently, actually, because a lot of clients are very interested in understanding it. And it is, as you said, the impetus is coming from the investment end. So, where they are required to have regard to sustainability, but then wanting to understand, has that flowed through to the consumer end and demand. And so we've done a lot of survey work on this, and the answer seems to be, it's a nice to have, and when I have a choice, I want to make that choice. But very often I don't have the ability to make that choice, and there are other things that are going to be higher up the hierarchy.
I do think, just to add to that, I think that, as you know, the supply of build to rent, particularly in certain concentrated areas, whether it be cities or locations in cities, means that differentiating your buildings will become even more important, and that's at the premium level, the mid-market and the lower market. And I actually think this sort of the eco and sustainable angle is a great way to be able to communicate why you're different and why the culture of this building is different. So yeah, I agree with you, Sandra, it is a choice, but I also think that operators and developers should get on the front foot of this, because if you're able to communicate it when you're maybe up against, you know, 5 to 10 other buildings offering a similar level of service, a similar level of flexibility, this could be a real key decision-making factor for that target market.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. It is where all things are equal. This can be your decision point. This can be the differentiator. I agree.
Okay, so Alistair's nodding his head sagely there. Does that mean you've got all the answers and you're about to launch a completely zero carbon building that will attract everybody?
Not quite yet. It is certainly something high on our agenda, and sustainability is absolutely key for us at Canary Wharf. I think the way I see it from the consumer's eyes at the moment is it's the things that they can see, and that's the green spaces, green roofs, it's the 3-phase recycling waste chutes and things like that. I think at the moment for the consumer, unless they can see it and see what difference it makes to them, there's not many consumers that are going to make that decision to go and rent in a building just because it has the best sustainability credentials of any other building in the area. It's probably still, you know, it's still price and place. If it's the right price and it's in the right place, they're more likely going to choose it. We'd love to see in the future that people make, you know, as consumers make more decisions on those, on the sustainability factors as well. I think just one point, coming back to the brand thing as well, for us, it was all about, we have built Virtus and we have 10 George Street, 8 Water Street in Newfoundland, but we didn't push hard on the branding of each building. What we've done is developed our brand of Virtus, and actually a lot of our residents now, when talking to people, talking to our team, they talk about living with Virtus, and I think that's the absolutely key thing. And in terms of design, it's then ensuring you have a level and quality of design and you maintain that. You know, for us, all 3 of our designs buildings should look and feel different, but the quality has got to all be at the same level. And I think that's what's been really important for us.
Okay, so quality, absolutely right. And we've talked about design here. I mean, Sophie, do you think you can create designs within furniture that can genuinely display their sustainability credentials and meet the ambitions for high quality design and everything else we want from them?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's about, you know, potentially us as providers making that decision even before the tenants know they need it. So choosing that FSC wood over, you know, non-FSC wood. For example, the sofas at 8 Water Street have removable covers. So that's a really easy, you know, if something happens to it, it can either be washed or replaced. But the actual frame of the sofa, which we know will last, you know, a very long time, you're getting a really good lifetime out of that. But there's other things as well, like just making sure that the space is well considered and really maximizing their quality of life within the overall apartments and the space within that they're inhabiting. And also just, you know, it is their daily life after all. It is, you know, where they're going to be spending their time. So you want to really be making sure that their quality of life is high, and that having good quality furniture will just, you know, impact that.
And are you able to communicate that effectively to the operators, to the marketeers, to the buildings? I mean, Alistair's just said very sensibly, look, you know, we look at place, price, and design, but how far do people appreciate design has that sustainability angle and can be articulated? I mean, you talk about FSC woods, you talk about the various things that go into it. I mean, I'm conscious in my own furniture, I don't necessarily know all of that stuff because it's not necessarily articulated to me particularly well.
Potentially about educating Alistair. We've had many meetings explaining these things. Yeah, it's just building that relationship with who you're providing the furniture to. And once you have a background, me as a designer, I've gone to the factories, I've seen how they operate, how they are actually teaching people in their local communities, those little stories, things like that. It's really building that knowledge and then passing it on to the sales team to tell the people that they're showing around the apartments. Yeah.
But I think it comes back, comes back to the brand piece, building your brand as saying these are the values that you are articulating continually. Alistair, are you happy to be educated?
Always happy to be educated, always. And I think the key point there is how we filter that down the pipeline so the customers understand what we've gone to ensure that the furniture is not only great quality but is sustainable. And so it's like Sophie says, educating our sales team so when they're walking around with customers, they have yet another great asset to tell them about why they should be renting with Virtus and one of the Virtus apartments in comparison to just another apartment in the Canary Wharf area, for instance. So yeah, it's building that full story, which again comes back to then showing what you stand for as a brand in terms of quality and sustainability.
Okay. And brand, is about touch points, consistency. Chris said, how far can we balance out design versus the management practices? I mean, Rory, my sense of all of the ratings is that we talk about how important design is in home views, but it is equally that, as Chris says, you don't remember Starbucks for the coffee. You hopefully remember it for the welcome you get, the feel you get from that, and so people versus facilities.
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the beginning, the build to rent is delivering the best experience for residents in new build in the UK versus owners in new build versus private tenants in new build, and the major reason for that is management in twofold. One, because the management in other sectors is not up to scratch. There's a 25% difference between what an owner would score their new build management versus build to rent tenants. There's obviously a differential in sectors, but it's also the fact that build to rent buildings are curated. Not all are, but a lot are, and in fact, some. To go back to your point, design versus management. There are some relatively standard buildings that are managed and operated by build to rent operators, and they come out with fantastic overall star ratings, including design. And it's because the people who run that building on a day-to-day basis are going above and beyond and delivering a fantastic job. So I do think, if in the same way, there's a number of buildings on home views, I won't name them, but have all the bells and whistles, spas, pools, gyms, etc. And because they're not managed, and brilliant architects, but because they're not managed properly, the whole experience is lost. So you have to do it in tandem. And I think the biggest learning that I've taken from our build to rent report is that it's all very well, factoring in design, building a beautiful building, having beautiful interior spaces, furnishing it wonderfully. But if you don't make that work for your residents on an ongoing basis, it's a wasted investment. So they're absolutely interlinked. And they're two of the biggest factors that correlate on overall experiences for tenants.
I'd definitely echo that. I think management's really important to it, and as Rory said, it's in tandem. I mean, if you take a restaurant, for instance, you can make up for bad food with really good service and management, but it's very difficult to do it the other way around. You can't make up for terrible management and service by just having good food. So the two need to really work well together.
Okay, thank you. I'd encourage people, our listeners, to ask questions. contribute on the chat. We're very open to do all of this stuff. Perhaps I could just, if we've articulated the value, we're trying to articulate the value of design. How have things changed during COVID, during lockdown? What's been most important, Rory, from residents' perspective? What has changed? How have their expectations changed? How have their experiences changed?
I think interestingly, there was a significant drop in the tenant and the owner resident experience in April, which you would expect.
In April 2020.
In April 2020, the April, March, April, and that, you know, no one could have prepared themselves from an operational perspective of what was about to happen. So yeah, we all knew, and Dave, all of your members, and Alistair included, you know, that there was a period of time of like, right, what's going on? How do we deal with this? But what we saw, which was really interesting after the first lockdown and in the summer, the schools got back to where they were from the previous year, and also exceeded them, because I think people felt in general, particularly in a build-to-rent building where you have a proactive management team, it created this safety net, it created this community, it created this channel of communication that you often don't get in other buildings that aren't as proactively managed. And because of that, it actually enriched the tenant experience. It created a level of sort of loyalty. And there was a significant understanding from tenants, considering they're paying rents that were factoring in using facilities, et cetera, which they didn't have access to, but they understood why. That wasn't always the case, but that was the general view. And in some cases where rent reductions were offered, that had a really, really positive impact from the tenant's perspective. That wasn't, you know, offered in all cases, and other operators dealt with it well. And from a design perspective, space just came through. I mean, as you would expect, and something that Alistair just mentioned, which is really interesting, that, you know, in their new building, that extra 20% space is really valuable. That was mentioned a lot. So, well, and that's not just about floor space, it's about storage. Bike storage, for instance, was one of the most consistent what we call facilities in line with top rated buildings. And so there was space storage, and also access to outside space, obviously, whether that's private or communal, was heightened and mentioned. So I don't think you know, what I think the general feedback is that people, that new build in general delivered a good experience through COVID, but build to rent particularly, were able to get on the front foot and you know, provide that sense of security. And one thing I should say is buildings with a concierge on average had a 5% higher rating than buildings without. So that FaceTime, that face-to-face experience with someone. So yeah, which is obviously you can't replace.
Yeah.
Can I just come in there on the management, because we've also done well, we do every summer, we do this very big tenant survey in the wider rental market. So it encompasses all segments of the rental market, from build to rent through to, you know, the small private landlords. And two things came out really strongly. We do it every July. We did it last July, so it was the sort of, you know, after the first lockdown. And actually, two things that came out really strongly on the management point, which I think echoes what Rory has said, is communication. So, you know, the level of satisfaction with your rental situation was enormously higher if you'd been communicated with by your landlord, whether that was a professional landlord or a managing agent or an individual. But communication was huge, and response times, which I think response times you would expect. You know, I've got a problem, something's broken, I want to be answered within. Actually, they wanted to be answered within 2 hours. That was the service expectation, was response within 2 hours. But I think, did my landlord or my landlord's representative talk to me and ask me if I'm okay? And yes, did they offer, you know, ask me if I needed help financially? Those two things were huge in that era, coming from all elements of the sector. And then, of course, the thing about private outdoor space, which was so critical during COVID.
I'd want to echo that. And for people who are interested in finding out more about residents' reactions to COVID, we with Kingsley Associates are directly on the life cycle about furniture from Tim Swaddle, and address it to you, Sophie. With the growing emphasis on sustainability, what consideration has been given to end-of-life disposal of the furniture? How far does that come into your thinking?
Yeah, so it's something that's very much on our agenda going forward this year. At the minute, it's just a case-by-case, client-by-client basis, assessment. We're making sure that the furniture will, last as long as we can make it last, basically, and it is very much durable. So it is something that we're looking into, and I know there is a growing demand with replenishment and things at the minute. So yeah, it's definitely on our agenda.
And Alistair, what are you thinking about furniture at its end of life, or when it needs replacing? Have you got anything in place on that?
We've not got anything in place at the moment, but we were working closely with the suppliers that have fitted out the buildings initially to see what they can do to recycle and replace that furniture as and when it's required. And the key for us is actually extending the life of the current furniture we have now in place, and that's about good management and checking of the apartments and ensuring that these things are maintained, because although it is just a sofa, how you maintain it can also extend the life of that sofa as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. The sense of reuse or extend rather than recycle, and it's crucial in there. And there's some interesting work going on, I know, with some of the furniture companies. Perhaps I can move on to storage, which I think we touched on, or maybe indirectly touched on. Chris Minette from Car Park Storage, I wonder why he's asking a question about storage, says, in your resident surveys and discussions, how has demand for storage changed, especially with COVID and residents spending more time at home, working from home, and the desire for living space? Rory, have you got any sense of desire for space in your...
Storage, I mean, when you can see it in black and white, but building by building, if a building hasn't been designed with storage in mind, it is a real bugbear for residents, particularly young families, or anyone that has any hobbies, whether it be sort of golf or cycling, etc. So yes, it is really important. I think that the ability to offer, as individual safe storage for bikes, maybe offer cage storage in the basement for larger items, it gets mentioned. It's something that, if it's important to you and you don't have it, I think it's a decision maker. It inform part of a potential resident's decision on whether a building is right for them. So getting it right and providing sufficient storage, it's definitely apparent when it isn't on home views.
And Alistair, have you noticed it over lockdown?
I've not seen, I think, storage per se increase drastically, but what I think we have seen is parcel delivery storage. So in that sense, yes, and for us on future buildings and also in the current buildings, we're looking at the strategy we currently have in place and see how we can better improve that. Number one, to take pressure off the concierge team. They are there 24 hours a day, but they're not there to continually take parcel delivery. So we have Bring Me boxes, which we encourage residents to use. And we're lucky, as I say, in Newfoundland, there's a lot of storage within the apartments. In 10 George Street, we have storage cages in the basement, which are well used, but not necessarily seen that significantly change. I'd say the two things are, just general parcel deliveries, which obviously we did see a big increase of during lockdown. But also for us in this area is food deliveries. The number of times that the door is open to Just Eat or Uber Eats is increases, and we currently just allow those drivers to come into the lobbies and for the residents to come down and collect their food. But there's probably a better solution for that in the future. And I think the key for us in term looking back at lockdown was that we were lucky enough to have the local areas fall back on. A lot of people were falling back on their local area, the local high street, and our residents really appreciated everything around them. And the other things we did in closing spaces, yes, we closed spaces, but also we treated our residents as adults and allowed them to make, a lot of times their own decision. The spaces were closed for the majority of the time, but when we did reopen them, it was for them to follow the guidelines the government had set. And a little thing that we were able to do in one of the buildings was actually share out some of the gym equipment from the gym so that residents could have it in their apartment and still exercise. So they didn't feel like everything we'd taken away, they weren't able to get any value out of it.
Okay, interesting. There's a question here which I'm not sure you've picked up from Russell, Marco, Alistair, about how we're finding Bring Me boxes and courier engagement. We've just implemented parcel safe place at Quinta in early days, but looking positive. Do you want to answer that, or do you want to go back to Russell directly?
I think it's actually more, for us, it was more about engaging residents, because the couriers are quite happy to use that. It's almost quicker for them. There's no personal interaction. They just got to touch the machine and put the parcel in the box. Their only frustration is when the boxes are then full or there's not one of the right size. So for us, it's more about saying to residents, download the Bring Me app. We haven't got it integrated into our Vertus app yet. Download the Bring Me app, and then every parcel delivery you get will go straight to the Bring Me box. And the benefit for you as the customer is that you immediately get a notification of that rather than waiting for an email to come from the concierge team.
Okay, that's good. We're coming towards the end, and I've got two interesting questions which I'll perhaps round up on. The first one's a relatively straightforward one. With resident feedback in mind, what design elements feature highly other than storage on the must-have list? Rory, I don't know, do you want to pick that one up? And Sandra, perhaps if you've got a view on that as well.
On home views, we obviously don't ask specific questions, so you tend to learn more about what people have issues with rather than and what they love rather than what works perfectly, which you would probably define as a must-have. But spatial layouts of apartments and light and views come through a lot, particularly in last year. The benefit of being able to sit on your private outside space was another key feature, and look at a wonderful view. In terms of facilities, gyms had the highest impact on the overall rating of a building of 10%, and communal inside spaces, so that could be co-working as well. There's, I mean, there isn't a sort of wishes. I suppose you need to get the basics right. When the units aren't laid out properly, it's something that comes through consistently. If there isn't enough storage, comes through consistently. But yeah, views, layout, and getting the right facilities key.
Sandra?
Yeah, I just add one more to that because I would echo those. But the one that came out really surprisingly high for us on our big survey was noise insulation. We weren't expecting that, and I think that was possibly related to working from home as well, just needing, it's all that background noise that you get on the Zoom calls. So yeah, noise insulation actually was, I think it even came out, it was set either above or it was up there with outdoor space and space to work from home.
I'd echo that. It's actually the two, noise insulation, so soundproofing, but also heating and ventilation issues were the two biggest issues. So I suppose if you were to flip that as a must-have, you need to get those right to make sure you've got happy residents. Alistair, did you want to add anything to that? Or?
Yeah, I was just going to say the future buildings we're looking at, the design of apartments is so crucial. And I sit down on a regular basis with our design managers and architects and talk through the minutiae of even the light switch placement and things like that. And it's so important for the resident experience. And the other thing I think is really important is design of sort of operational and welfare spaces for the team, because the team is so important to us, and we have great spaces in our buildings for our teams to be able to get away from work for an hour during their lunch breaks, whether they're on shift or whether they're doing the leasing. But I think what we can't get away from in this industry is, yes, we talk about design for the consumer, but the reason that our consumers are generally happy is because of the management and the service. And that service is delivered by the team. So it's really important to think about your team and the space they've got in the buildings as well. Okay, that's great. It's 10:56, and I'm very keen to wind up on time. But I just want to pose one final question, which I don't know whether you'll be able to answer or not. It's from Jai Desai, and it touches on probably the hottest topic, I think, in build to rent at the moment, which is, Jai says, the growth, BTR in urban areas growth has been phenomenal. What about suburban build to rent? And I'd also add into that single family rental. What factors will drive operators to build on those sites? And given the relevance for this conversation, what place will design play in single family homes and suburban rentals where there is much less density? You're talking low rise or single family houses. And Alistair, is it an area that you and the Vertus team will remain breaking into? I think number one, yes, absolutely, it will work in the right locations. And in the question posed, the key things there are proximity to the transport links and the amenities within the area. That's absolutely key. And part of the success we've had so far at Versus is because we sit on a established estate with all the amenities you could want locally. Lots of our customers obviously really happy to move. They have the amenities of the building and the amenities of the estate. But I think for us to move out to something like that, absolutely. I think it would be looking at how we protect our brand in moving into a different market, and the level of the market we'd be able to attract in a suburban market or in the single sort of the low rise market. So I think absolutely it will work, but I think we'd have to look at how we adjust our brand, and then it would be about the offering that you could put onto a site like that and how that compare to the type of buildings we've currently delivered.
Interesting one. Does anyone else want to make a comment on that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go Sandra first and then Rory.
So just to say, we've done a lot of work on quantifying the demand for this, and there's no doubt the demand is there for suburban family housing. So I think that's a given. That's established. And the challenges are because it's lower density. How do you manage how do you deliver the same level of management service, the same response times on repairs, and actually to Alistair's point, can you offer the amenities, or are you going to rely on amenities existing in the locality already? But I think I think demand is there, but the challenges are, at what is effectively much lower density. How do you deliver those things that set apart or differentiate build to rent in the urban environment, which is amenity and management service?
Rory, you're going to say something.
Regional build to rent developments are the most highly rated on HomeView. So that not necessarily, so by regional I mean outside of London. That's on average. We cover a lot of Sigma's developments that are obviously single family housing. I think what we've seen is that, yes, okay, you might not be able to what we imagine from design, integrate all the facilities and everything you can in a high density apartment block, but just the experience of having a single family home owned and managed by an institution investor and a professional management company is so different to what these tenants have been experiencing before. It goes back to the original point. This is about management. Build to rent is about management. And so a single family home, which could be very similar to a house builder home next door that you could own or buy or rent as a private tenant, is a different experience with a build to rent management. So and we, the initial feedback we've had is exactly that the tenants in these types of developments are having a good experience as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great place to stop. I'd echo it. Conversations we were having in the UKAA Working Party on single family rental yesterday with Rob Sumner from Sigma was all about that actually the product, the pure bricks and mortar, is not different from other things. It is the service you give, and that's not necessarily about a lot of amenities, a lot of high touch stuff. It's ensuring that if your audience are families, you're giving them things that families want, whatever they may be. But it comes back down to, just to sum up, I think what we've said today is, we're talking about the value of design, and we've talked about the importance of good quality design, but we've really talked about the fact you drive the premium through service, through consistency, through good brand or delivery of your brand values, not just, but the importance of good quality furniture and all of that. So at this point, I'd just like to say thank you to our panelists, to Chris, to Sophie, to Rory, to Alistair and Sandra for what I enjoy as a good conversation. I think it was great, and I hope everybody on the call enjoyed it as well. Just to remind you, there will be some more UKAA events coming up. We've got an operators forum on Thursday and a webinar on Tuesday the 15th on heat networks. Why do they matter and why won't they go away? Or won't they go away? I'm not sure. Presented by Insight Energy. The session I was talking about in terms of the launch of the Kingsley Associate reports is on Wednesday the 23rd, and on Tuesday the 22nd we've got an interesting virtual roundtable discussion, customer insight and opportunities for industry collaboration, presented by Real Service and CGA, and that's looking at whether there's an opportunity in the industry to set up a standing panel of consumers to be available to do research. If anyone would like to take part in that, I think there's a couple of slots there. let us know, and we'll send an invite to you. That's on Tuesday the 22nd. Lots more coming up, but again, thank you once again for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've certainly learned a lot, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Cheerio. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.